God is with Joseph. On Genesis chapters 40 to 46. The word letter V mean and indicates to a word verse. For an examples, the word V1 means verse 1 and the word VS mean verse 2. To God be the glory. Chapter 40. The cupbearer and the baker in prison. V1 Sometime after this, the king of Egypt's cupbearer offended his master the king. And the king's baker also offended him. V2 Pharaoh was angry with his two servants. He was angry with the chief cupbearer and with the chief baker. V3 He put them in prison. He put them in the prison where Joseph was. That was the house of the captain of the guards. V4 The captain of the guards told Joseph to look after them. So Joseph was responsible for them. And they remained in prison for a long time. Verse 1. A cupbearer was an important person. He provided the wine that the king drank. He gave the king's cup to the king whenever the king drank. But if anybody wanted to poison the king, they might put poison in the wine. So the cupbearer guarded the wine carefully. And the cupbearer always drank some of the wine before he gave it to the king. That showed that there was no poison in it. So the cupbearer was always near to the king. The king trusted him. The cupbearer might even give advice to the king, as he did in Genesis 41:9-13. We can be sure that Joseph often talked with the cupbearer in the prison. So Joseph heard many things about Pharaoh and about his court. That was a part of God's plan. God was preparing Joseph for his future work. V5 And one night they both dreamed. The king of Egypt's cupbearer dreamed and his baker dreamed. Each one had his own dream and each dream had its own meaning. V6 In the morning, Joseph came to them. He saw that they were worried. V7 So he spoke to Pharaoh's servants who were with him in the prison. He asked them, "Why are your faces sad today?" V8 And they said to him, "We have had dreams. And there is nobody who can explain their meanings to us." And Joseph said to them, "God knows the meanings. Please tell the dreams to me." Verse 8. They said, "There is nobody who can explain their meanings to us." In Pharaoh's court there were wise men. These wise men believed that they could tell the meanings of dreams. But the cupbearer and the baker were in prison. Therefore, they could not ask the wise men to explain their dreams. God knows the meanings. That does not mean that God will always tell us the meanings of dreams. And it does not mean that all dreams are messages from God. But God can use dreams. He can use anything that He has made. He can use dreams to speak to us. And when God gives a dream, He can explain its meaning. The cupbearer's dream. V9 So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph. He said to him, "In my dream there was a vine plant." V10 The vine had 3 branches. The flowers appeared and they grew very quickly. Then the grapes appeared and they became ripe. V11 I held Pharaoh's cup in my hand. So I took the grapes. And I squeezed them so that the juice ran into Pharaoh's cup. Then I put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. V12 Then Joseph said to him, "This is what the dream means. The 3 branches mean 3 days. V13 In 3 days, Pharaoh will forgive you and he will put you back in your job. And you shall put Pharaoh's cup into his hand as you did before. You shall again be his cupbearer." V14 But please remember me, when things are well with you. Please be kind to me and mention me to Pharaoh. Then he may let me leave this prison. V15 I did not deserve that they should put me into the prison. People seized me and they brought me here from the land of the Hebrews. And while I have been here in Egypt I have not done a wrong deed. Verses 9-10. A vine is a plant that produces grapes. Grapes are the fruits of vines. People make wine out of grapes. Verse 11. The chief cupbearer dreamed that he was doing his usual job. Verse 13. In 3 days does not mean 3 days later. The Hebrews counted the first day and the last day. So the 3 days were the day when the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph. 1 whole day. The morning of the next day. That makes a little more than 2 nights and a day. The baker's dream. v16 The chief baker realized that the meaning of the cupbearer's dream was good. So the chief baker said to Joseph, I also had a dream. There were 3 baskets on my head. v17 In the highest basket there were bread and cakes for Pharaoh. But the birds ate the food that was in the basket. They ate it while the basket was on my head. v18 And Joseph answered, This is the meaning of the dream. The 3 baskets mean 3 days. v19 In 3 days Pharaoh will cut off your head and he will hang you on a tree. And the birds will eat the meat from your body. Verse 17. The baker dreamed that he was trying to do his usual job. But he could not give the bread and the cakes to Pharaoh. Before he could do that, the birds ate them. v20 The 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday. So he made a big meal for all his servants. He sent for the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. People brought them and they put them in front of Pharaoh among his servants. v21 Pharaoh took the chief cupbearer back into his job. So the cupbearer again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. v22 But Pharaoh hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had said to them. v23 But the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. Verses 20 to 22. These 2 dreams told what would happen 2 days later. And, 2 years after this time, Pharaoh had 2 dreams. See Genesis 41:1. Those dreams told what would happen during the next 14 years. All these dreams told the future correctly because God had given them. God knows what will happen in the future. But He does not often tell us what will happen in the future. Verse 23. He forgot him. This also was a part of God's plan. The time had not come when Joseph should go to Pharaoh. God planned that it would happen 2 years later. Sometimes we think that God works very slowly. We often need to be patient. God knows the best time for each of the things that He does. Chapter 41. Pharaoh's dreams. v1 After 2 whole years, Pharaoh had a dream. He dreamed that he stood by the river Nile. v2 And he saw 7 cows, which came up out of the river Nile. The cows were healthy and fat. They fed among the plants that were by the river. v3 And Pharaoh saw 7 other cows, which came up out of the river Nile after the first cows. These cows were ugly and thin. They stood by the first 7 cows near the river Nile. v4 And the ugly, thin cows ate the healthy, fat cows. And Pharaoh awoke. Verse 1. The Nile is a very big river. Egypt has very little rain, but the river Nile provides water for Egypt. It provides water so that the crops can grow. It provides water for the plants that the cows eat. So the river Nile is very important in Egypt. And a dream about the river Nile might bring a very important message. v5 Pharaoh slept again and he dreamed again. He saw a stem of corn that had 7 grains. Each grain was fat and good. The grains grew on one stem. v6 And he saw 7 more grains that grew after the first grains. These grains were thin, as if a cold wind had blown on them from the east. v7 And the thin grains swallowed the 7 fat grains. And Pharaoh awoke. He realized that it was a dream. v8 So in the morning, Pharaoh was worried. He sent for all the people in Egypt who knew magic. He sent for all the wise men and he told his dreams to them. But nobody could explain to Pharaoh the meaning of his dreams. Verse 5. The corn had long stems. The grains were at the tops of the stems. Each grain was a seed. Verse 8. Probably the wise men tried to explain the dreams. Perhaps they guessed part of the meaning of the dreams. But they were afraid to say that bad things would happen. And Pharaoh did not believe that their explanations were true. Later in verse 37 Pharaoh believed what Joseph said. v9 Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, I remember my faults today. v10 I remember that Pharaoh was angry with his servants. He put me and the chief baker in prison. He put us in the house of the captain of the guards. v11 We both dreamed on the same night. The baker and I both dreamed. We each had a dream that had its own meaning. V12 A young Hebrew was there with us. He was a servant of the captain of the guards. And when we told him our dreams, he explained to us their meanings. He explained to each man the meaning of his dream. V13 And the meanings that he explained to us actually happened. I came back to my job, but Pharaoh hanged the baker. Verse 9. This was happening in the way that God intended. The cupbearer had forgotten Joseph until this time. But the cupbearer was with Pharaoh when Pharaoh spoke to the wise men. That reminded the cupbearer about Joseph. Verse 12. The cupbearer said that Joseph was a servant of the captain of the guards. He did not say that Joseph was a prisoner. This tells us about how Joseph lived in the prison. He had some freedom while he was in the prison. He did not have to remain in a small room. See Genesis 39:22. Pharaoh sends for Joseph. V14 Then Pharaoh sent for Joseph. So people brought Joseph quickly out of the prison. Joseph shaved himself and he put on other clothes. Then he came in front of Pharaoh. V15 And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream. There is nobody who can tell me its meaning. I have heard that you can explain the meaning of a dream. If someone tells you the dream you can explain the meaning. V16 Joseph answered Pharaoh, I do not have the power to do that. But God will give the right answer to Pharaoh. Verse 14. Joseph had been in Egypt for 13 years. See Genesis 37:2, Joseph was 17 years of age. And see Genesis 41:46, Joseph was 30 years of age. And Joseph had been in the prison for most of that time. Joseph shaved himself. Hebrews often had beards. But in Egypt, only prisoners or lazy people had beards. The Egyptians did not allow anybody to come to Pharaoh with a beard. Verse 16. Joseph needed great courage to say this. The inhabitants of Egypt believed in many false gods. They also believed that Pharaoh was a god. Joseph had learned about the one God from his father Jacob. He knew that God had been with him. He had the courage to tell Pharaoh about God. And he trusted God to help him now. Joseph knew God well. He could tell Pharaoh what God would do. His father Jacob also knew God well. But Jacob and Joseph learned to know God in different ways. Jacob did not know God until he was adult. Jacob's father, Isaac, had told Jacob about God. But Jacob himself did not know God. Then God appeared to him in a dream. See Genesis 28:1-17. Many people nowadays are like that. And they remember the first occasion when they met God. Joseph learned about God from his father Jacob. And the Bible does not tell us that God appeared to Joseph. Instead, God guided Joseph and he taught Joseph by his experiences. Many people nowadays are like that. They knew about God when they were young. And they have learned to know him better during their lives. Joseph explains the dreams. V17 Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, I saw in my dream that I stood near to the river Nile. V18 And 7 cows came up out of the river Nile. They were fat and healthy. They fed among the plants that were by the river. V19 And 7 other cows came up after them. Those cows were poor and ugly and thin. I have never seen cows anywhere in Egypt that were like those. V20 And the thin, ugly cows ate the first 7 fat cows. V21 But when they had eaten them, they were not fatter. Nobody would have known that they had eaten them. They were still as ugly as they were at the beginning. Then I awoke. V22 I also saw in my dream 7 grains that grew on one stem of corn. The grains were fat and good. V23 And 7 other grains grew after them. Those grains were poor and thin. They seemed as if a cold wind had blown on them from the east. V24 And the thin grains swallowed the 7 good grains. I told these dreams to the people who know magic. But there was nobody who could explain the meaning to me. V25 Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's 2 dreams are one. God has shown to Pharaoh what he will do. v26 The 7 good cows are 7 years. And the 7 good grains are 7 years. The 2 dreams are 1. v27 The 7 thin, ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years. And the 7 empty grains that the wind from the east blew are also 7 years. They are 7 years when there will be no food. v28 What I said to Pharaoh is true. God has shown to Pharaoh what he will do. v29 There will be 7 years when food will be plentiful in all Egypt. v30 But after those years, there will be 7 years when there will be no food. The inhabitants of Egypt will forget the plenty. The famine will ruin the land. v31 People will not remember the plenty because of the famine that will follow. The famine will be very bad. v32 And Pharaoh's dream was double. That means that God has decided this thing. God will soon make it happen. Verse 31. The famine will be very bad. In some years there is not enough rain and so there is a famine. This is natural. This happened during Abraham's life. See Genesis 12:10. It had happened during Isaac's life. See Genesis 26:1. Sometimes the famine lasts for several years. So the 7 years famine should not surprise us. The wonderful things were. In the 7 years before the famine, the crops were extra good. The famine started at the time that God had said. The famine lasted for the time that God had said. The famine brought Israel's children to live in Egypt. That was God's plan. God often uses things that are natural. He uses things that He has made. He uses them as His tools. They are wonderful because events happen at the right time and in the right way. Verse 32. God will soon make it happen. God could have sent enough rain to prevent the famine. But He did not do that. He sent the famine and He warned people about it. The famine was a part of God's plan. Because of the famine, Jacob and his family moved to Egypt. And in Egypt, Jacob's descendants became a nation. So we can see the reason why God sent the famine. Usually, when God sends a famine or a flood, we do not know the reason. v33 Joseph continued, Now therefore let Pharaoh select a man who is clever and wise. And let Pharaoh give him authority over the whole country, Egypt. v34 Let Pharaoh appoint managers over the land. And let them take parts of the crops that the land produces. Let them take 1 part out of every 5 parts. Let them do this during the 7 years of plenty. v35 And let them gather all the food during these good years that will come. Let them store grain as Pharaoh gives authority to them. The grain shall be food for the people who live in the cities. Let the managers store the grain until people need it. v36 The grain shall be a reserve of food for the country. People will need that food during the 7 years when there will be no food in Egypt. So the inhabitants of the country shall not die. The lack of food shall not kill them. Verses 33 to 36. Joseph did not have enough time to think about this plan. But he proposed a plan that was correct. 1 part out of every 5 parts. Verse 34 was the correct amount. Joseph did not make the plan himself. God had made the plan and He showed it to Joseph. God does not always do that for us. More often, He wants us to think for ourselves. He has given us brains and He wants us to use them. But we must always be ready for God to guide us. Pharaoh gives authority to Joseph. v37 Pharaoh and his servants considered that this proposal was good. v38 And Pharaoh said to his servants, We could not find another man who is like this man. God's spirit is in him. v39 So Pharaoh said to Joseph, God has shown all this to you. Nobody is as clever and as wise as you are. v40 Therefore you shall have authority over my house. All my people shall do as you command them. Only I, who sit on the king's high chair, will be greater than you are. Verses 37 to 40. Joseph had explained Pharaoh's dreams. But Pharaoh realized that Joseph had done more than that. He had also proposed a plan. By Joseph's plan, the inhabitants of Egypt could have enough food during the famine. Pharaoh decided that the plan was good. So Pharaoh told Joseph to carry out that plan. v41 And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have given you authority over the whole country, Egypt. v42 Then Pharaoh took his ring of authority from his hand. He put it on Joseph's hand. He dressed Joseph in linen clothes. He put a gold chain round Joseph's neck. v43 He made Joseph ride in his second chariot. And men shouted in front of his chariot, Make way. So Pharaoh put Joseph over all Egypt. v44 Moreover Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh. But nobody shall move a hand or a foot in all Egypt if you do not permit it. Verse 42. Pharaoh's ring was a signet ring. The shape of a signet ring has a special pattern. Its owner would press the ring on a flat lump of clay. Clay is a kind of soil. One can form it into a flat lump. One can write on the flat lump with the point of a stick. People used flat lumps of clay as we use paper nowadays. Then anyone can see the pattern on the lump of clay. So the words that are on the lump of clay have authority. Therefore when Pharaoh gave Joseph the ring, he gave him authority. See the comment on Genesis 38:18. Linen is a material. People make cloth out of it. Only important people and priests wore linen clothes. Pharaoh made Joseph into a ruler. He may have also made him into a priest. Verse 43. A chariot was a cart that had 2 wheels. 1 or 2 horses pulled it. It could move fast. Pharaoh and other important people rode in chariots. The army used chariots of a different kind when they fought. Joseph rode in Pharaoh's second chariot because the first chariot was for Pharaoh only. Nobody knows whether make way is the right meaning. Some people suggest that the meaning is bend the knees. To bend the knees is to show that you respect someone. Verse 44. I am Pharaoh. Pharaoh meant that he was the only person with great authority. But he gave that authority to Joseph. In future, Joseph would have the authority that Pharaoh usually had. Nobody shall move a hand or a foot. Pharaoh did not mean exactly what he said. But he meant that Joseph had complete authority in all Egypt. v45 Pharaoh named Joseph Zaphenath-Paneah. He gave Asenath to Joseph as his wife. Asenath was Potiphar's daughter and Potiphar was a priest of On. So Joseph had authority over all Egypt. v46 Joseph was 30 years of age when he became a servant of Pharaoh king of Egypt. Joseph went out from Pharaoh's palace and he traveled through the whole country, Egypt. Verse 45. Some people suggest that Zaphenath-Paneah may mean one who preserves people alive. Joseph rules over Egypt. v47 During the 7 years of plenty, the earth produced a large quantity of food. v48 And Joseph gathered all the food during the 7 years when there was plenty in Egypt. He stored food in the cities. He stored in the cities the food that came from the fields. He stored in each city the food that came from its neighborhood. v49 And Joseph stored a great amount of grain. It was an amount like the sand that is by the sea. And Joseph stopped measuring it, because nobody could measure it. v50 Before the years of famine came, Joseph had 2 sons. Their mother was Asenath, who was Potiphar's daughter. Potiphar was a priest of On. v51 Joseph called his older son Manasseh. He said, God has made me forget all my trouble. He has made me forget my father's house. v52 He called his second son Ephraim. He said, God has made me able to produce in the country where I have had much trouble. Verse 48. This does not mean that Joseph gathered food himself. Joseph commanded what his managers should do. Pharaoh had appointed managers. See verse 34. And the managers commanded their workers. Verses 51 to 52. Manasseh sounds like forget. Ephraim means fruit. Fruit is something that a plant produces. God has made me forget my father's house. Joseph thought that he would not see his father and his brothers again. He did not know God's plan. God had put Joseph in Pharaoh's court so that he could help his father and his brothers. God seldom tells us his plans before they happen. The famine. V53 The 7 years of plenty in Egypt finished. V54 The 7 years when there was no food began. It happened as Joseph had said. There was a famine in every country. But in all Egypt there was bread. V55 When all the inhabitants of Egypt were hungry, they cried for bread. They cried to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to all the inhabitants of Egypt, "Go to Joseph. Do what he tells you to do." V56 So when the whole country had a lack of food, Joseph opened all the stores. He sold grain to the inhabitants of Egypt. He did this because there was a famine in all Egypt. V57 Moreover, people from all the earth came to Egypt. They came to Joseph in order to buy grain. They did this because the famine was very bad in all the earth. Verse 55. Go to Joseph. The people did not go to Joseph himself. Joseph told the people what they should do. But he provided grain through the organization that he had set up. Verse 57. All the earth means the parts of the earth that those people knew. That was only a small part of the whole earth. Chapter 42. Jacob sends his sons to Egypt. V1 Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt. So he said to his sons, "You look at each other and you do nothing." V2 I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go there and buy grain for us. Then we shall live and we shall not die. V3 So Joseph's 10 brothers went to Egypt in order to buy grain. V4 But Jacob did not send Benjamin, who was Joseph's brother, with the other brothers. He was afraid that some evil thing might happen to him. V5 So Israel's sons came to Egypt. They were among many other people who came to Egypt. They came to buy grain, because the lack of food was serious in their own country, Canaan. Verses 1 to 2. When Jacob mentioned Egypt, his sons were unwilling to go there. Perhaps the word Egypt reminded them of Joseph and therefore they felt guilty. But they went when Jacob told them to go. Verse 4. Benjamin was Joseph's brother. Their father was Jacob and their mother was Rachel. The 10 other brothers might be called Joseph's half-brothers. Their father was Jacob but they had different mothers. But all 12 were often called brothers. For a list of the brothers, see Genesis 35:23-26 and the comment. When Joseph was still with his father Jacob, Joseph was Jacob's favorite. Jacob cared for Joseph more than he cared for his other sons. See Genesis 37:3. After that time, Jacob believed that Joseph was dead. So Benjamin became Jacob's favorite. Jacob refused to send Benjamin anywhere where he would be in danger. So he sent his other 10 sons to Egypt but he did not send Benjamin. V6 Now Joseph was the ruler over the whole country, Egypt. He was the one who sold grain to all the inhabitants of the country. And Joseph's brothers came and they bent themselves down to the ground in front of Joseph. V7 Joseph saw his brothers and he knew them. But he acted toward them as if they were foreigners. He spoke severely to them. "From where have you come?" he said. They said, "We have come from Canaan in order to buy food." V8 And Joseph knew his brothers, but they did not know him. Verse 6. Joseph was the one who sold grain. Joseph certainly did not sell all the grain himself. His servants did that. But perhaps Joseph sold grain to those who came from far away. Or perhaps he saw his brothers and so he decided to deal with them himself. Verse 7. It was God who had brought Joseph to Egypt. Joseph knew that. And God had changed Joseph's character since he came to Egypt. Because of this, Joseph did not blame his brothers and he was ready to forgive them. But he did not tell them yet that he forgave them. He waited until he knew more about them. Perhaps they would not be friendly to him. And perhaps they were not sorry for what they did to him. Joseph acted in the way that God acts. God does not blame us for the wrong things that we have done. He is ready to forgive us. But he waits until he knows 2 things about us. Do we want to know him? And are we truly sorry for the wrong things that we have done? Verse 8. There were many reasons why the brothers did not recognize Joseph. These are some of the reasons. They believed that Joseph was dead. Joseph had shaved his beard off. Joseph spoke in the Egyptian language and an interpreter translated. Joseph wore Egyptian clothes. Joseph had an Egyptian name. Joseph speaks with his brothers. v9 Joseph remembered the dreams that he had dreamed about them. And he said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see the weak places of this country. You are discovering how an enemy might attack it." v10 They said to him, "No, sir. Your servants have come in order to buy food." v11 We are all one man's sons. We are honest men. Your servants are not spies. v12 He said to them, "No, you have come to see the weak places of this country." v13 And they said, "We, your servants, are 12 brothers. We are the sons of one man, who lives in Canaan. The youngest brother is now with our father, and one brother is dead." Verse 9. Spies are people who come from a foreign country. They come in order to gather information. Spies may discover how an army could attack the country successfully. Joseph knew that his brothers were not spies, but he probably wanted to test them. Perhaps he wanted to know whether there had been a change in their character. However, he did not really want to hurt them. Verse 13. The youngest brother, who was with their father, was Benjamin. And when they said, "One brother is dead," they meant Joseph. And Joseph knew that they meant him. The brothers had persuaded their father Jacob that Joseph was dead. See Genesis 37:31 and comment. But, when they did that, they were lying to their father. They did not actually know whether Joseph was dead, but they believed that he was dead. v14 But Joseph said to them, "What I said is true. You are spies." v15 But I will test you. You shall not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. That is as certain as that Pharaoh lives. v16 Let one person go. Let him bring your brother, while you remain in prison here. I will test your words. I will discover whether you say true things. If you do not, you are certainly spies. That is as certain as that Pharaoh lives. v17 And Joseph put all the brothers together in prison for 3 days. Verse 14. For spies, see comment on verse 9. Verse 16. So I will test your words. It would not test whether they were spies. But Joseph did not really want to test them. He wanted to see his brother Benjamin. Verse 17. For 3 days does not mean 3 whole days. The Hebrews counted the first day and the last day. So the 3 days were the end of the day when Joseph spoke to his brothers. 1 whole day. The early morning of the next day. That makes about 2 nights and a day. v18 On the 3rd day, Joseph spoke to them. He said, "Do what I command. So I will let you live, because I respect God." v19 If you are honest men, let one remain in the prison. Let the other men go. Let them carry grain for your families, who have no food. v20 And bring your youngest brother to me. In this way I will test whether your words are true. So you shall not die. And they did so. Verse 19. Joseph had changed his plans since he last spoke to his brothers. Then, he said that only one should return to Canaan. See verse 16. But he decided that 9 should return. There were several reasons for this. One brother could not carry enough grain to Canaan. Jacob would be more likely to send Benjamin if 9 sons persuaded him. Jacob might think that he had lost 9 more of his sons. That would be a great shock to him. The brothers had sent away one brother, Joseph, 20 years before. So Joseph took away one more brother. That was a suitable punishment. v21 Then they spoke to each other. They said, "Truly we are guilty for what we did to our brother, Joseph. We saw his great fear. He appealed to us and we refused to listen. Therefore this trouble has come on us." v22 And Reuben answered them, I told you not to hurt the boy. But you did not listen to me. So now this is a punishment for his death. v23 They did not know that Joseph understood them. When they spoke to Joseph, somebody interpreted their words into the Egyptian language. v24 Joseph turned away from them and he wept. Then he returned to them and he spoke to them. And he took Simeon from them. He bound Simeon while they watched him. Verses 21 to 22. The brothers were losing one member. That reminded them that they had sent Joseph away many years before. They thought that God was punishing them for what they had done. Reuben called Joseph the boy. Joseph's age had been 17 years at that time. But Joseph was the youngest except for Benjamin, who was still with his father. And Reuben considered that he was responsible for Joseph. So Reuben called Joseph the boy. Verse 24. He bound Simeon. Joseph told his servants to tie Simeon with strong strings. Probably he untied him when the brothers had gone. Joseph had said that Simeon would be in prison. See verse 19. He would probably live in Joseph's house. He would not be free to go wherever he wanted to go. But he would not have to stay in a small room. v25 And Joseph told his servants to fill the brothers' bags with grain. He told his servants to put each brother's money in his sack. And he told his servants to give food to the brothers for the journey. His servants did what Joseph commanded. v26 Then the brothers loaded their grain onto their donkeys and they set off. Verse 25. The bags contained the grain that the brothers had bought. The sacks contained their clothes and their other possessions. The food for their donkeys was in their sacks. The food for their donkeys was not part of the grain that they had bought. To give honor to one's father was very important in those days. Joseph would never take money from his own father. But the money that his brothers brought belonged to their father. Therefore, Joseph could not take the money from them. But he could not refuse the money. If he refused it, he would need to explain his reason. He would need to say that he was their brother. And he was not yet ready to say that. So he returned the money to them secretly. Perhaps he did not expect that this would make his brothers and his father so anxious. See verse 28, Then they were very anxious. The brothers returned home. v27 The brothers reached the place where they would stay for the night. One brother opened his sack in order to give food to his donkey. And he saw his money, which was in the mouth of his sack. v28 And he said to his brothers, Somebody has put my money back. It is here. It is in the top of my sack. Then they were very anxious. They looked at each other and they trembled. They said, What has God done to us? Verse 28. The brothers did not understand what was happening. Therefore they were afraid. They did not understand why the ruler of the country himself spoke with them. They expected to buy grain from a less important person. They did not understand why Joseph spoke severely to them. They did not understand why he called them spies. See comment on verse 9. They did not understand why he put them in prison. They did not understand why Joseph wanted to see Benjamin. They did not understand why Joseph kept Simeon in Egypt. And they did not understand why the money was in the sack. The brothers were afraid for another reason too. These events reminded them about Joseph. They were responsible for Joseph's death. That is what they thought. And if they brought Benjamin to Egypt, they might cause Benjamin's death. And Benjamin was Joseph's brother. See the first part of the comment on verse 4. Also, they had intended to sell Joseph for money. See Genesis 37:26-27. And they had lost Simeon but they had gained some money. So these two events were similar. They thought that perhaps God was punishing them. And they said, What has God done to us? v29 They reached their own country, Canaan, and they came to Jacob their father. They told him all that had happened. They said, v30 The man who is the ruler of the country spoke severely to us. He said that we were spies. v31 But we said to him, We are honest men and we are not spies. v32 We are 12 brothers. We are sons of one father. One brother is dead and the youngest brother is now with our father in Canaan. v33 Then the man who is the ruler of the country spoke to us. He said, I shall know that you are honest men in this way. Leave one brother with me and go on your way. Take grain for your families, who have no food. v34 And bring your youngest brother to me. Then I shall know that you are not spies. Then I shall know that you are honest men. And I will give your brother back to you and you shall trade in this country. Verse 30. For the meaning of spies, see the comment on verse 9. v35 The brothers emptied their sacks. Then they saw that every man's bundle of money was in his sack. They and their father saw their bundles of money. They were all very worried. v36 And Jacob their father said to them, You have taken my children away from me. Joseph is dead. We have lost Simeon. And now you want to take Benjamin away. All these evil things have happened to me. v37 Then Reuben said to his father, Kill my 2 sons if I do not bring Benjamin back to you. Let me look after Benjamin and I will bring him back to you. v38 But Jacob said, My son shall not go to Egypt with you. His brother is dead and only he remains. Perhaps some evil thing will happen to him during the journey that you will make. You would send me and my gray hairs sadly to my grave. Verse 36. God promised to Jacob's grandfather Abraham that his descendants would be as many as the stars. See Genesis 15:5. God repeated this promise to Jacob's father Isaac. See Genesis 26:3-4. And God promised to Jacob, Your family shall become a nation and a group of peoples. See Genesis 35:11. But Joseph was dead. That is what Jacob thought. Simeon was a slave in Egypt. That too is what Jacob thought. And people wanted to take Benjamin away. It seemed to Jacob that he was losing all his sons. God's promises were failing. Jacob probably thought of how God tested Abraham. He probably compared himself with Abraham. God had promised that Abraham would have a son, Isaac. Then God told Abraham to kill Isaac as an offering. See Genesis 22:1-2. Abraham obeyed because he trusted God. And God saved Isaac. God had promised that Jacob would have sons. But God could not save Jacob's sons. One was dead and one was a slave in a foreign country. That is what Jacob thought. And Jacob could not obey God as Abraham did. God had not told him what to do. And so he could not obey God. We may sometimes be in a situation that is similar to this. It seems to us that God's promises are failing. It seems that God's plan is not working. And God has not told us what to do. And so we cannot obey Him. We must trust Him, especially when it is difficult to trust Him. Actually, God's plan was working well. All Jacob's 12 sons lived and they had large families. And Joseph was ready to save them all from the famine. And God was ready to move them all to Egypt. Egypt was the place where their descendants could learn to become a nation. Verse 37. I will bring him back to you. This promise meant nothing. Reuben did not have the power to keep Benjamin safe. Verse 38. His brother is dead. Joseph was Benjamin's only real brother. The other 10 men were half-brothers. Only he remains. Benjamin was the only one whose mother was Rachel. See the comment on verse 4. Chapter 43. Jacob sends his sons to Egypt again. v1 Now there was an extreme lack of food in the region. v2 And they had eaten the grain that the brothers had brought from Egypt. So their father said to them, Go again. Buy a little food for us. v3 But Judah said to him, The man warned us definitely. He said, You shall not see my face again unless your brother is with you. v4 If you will send our brother with us, we will go. We will go to Egypt and we will buy food for you. v5 But if you will not send him, we will not go. The man said to us, You shall not see my face, unless your brother is with you. v6 Israel said, "Why were you so cruel to me? Why did you tell the man that you had another brother?" v7 They replied, "The man asked us all about ourselves and about our relatives. He said, 'Is your father still alive? Have you another brother?' We gave him answers to these questions. We could not know what he would say. But he said, 'Bring your brother here.' v8 And Judah spoke to Israel his father. He said, 'Send the boy with me and we will set out on the journey. So we and you and our children may live and we may not die. v9 I will be responsible for him. If anybody hurts him, you shall blame me. I shall bring him back to you and I shall put him in front of you again. And if I do not, then the blame shall be on me for all ages.' v10 If we had not delayed, we would now have gone and returned twice." Verse 3. Judah spoke on behalf of all the brothers. We would expect that Reuben would do this. Reuben was the oldest brother. And, before this time, Reuben was the most responsible brother. See Genesis 37:21. But Judah became the leader. And, later, Jacob dealt with Judah as if he was the oldest. See Genesis 49:8 and the comment. Verse 8. Benjamin was not a boy. He was more than 22 years of age. This is how we know that Benjamin was born before Joseph went to Egypt. Joseph was in Egypt for 13 years before he met Pharaoh. See Genesis 37:2, Joseph was 17 years of age, and see Genesis 41:46, Joseph was 30 years of age. After Joseph met Pharaoh there were 7 years of plenty. The famine had already lasted 2 years. See Genesis 45:6. The total of 13 and 7 and 2 is 22. But Benjamin was the youngest brother. Also, he was Jacob's favorite son. So Judah called him the boy. Verse 9. Reuben had made a promise like this. See Genesis 42:37 and the comment. And now Judah promised that he would bring Benjamin back. However, he knew that he might not be able to do that. But he still made the promise. If he did not promise, his father would not agree. So Benjamin would not go to Egypt. And the brothers would not go and they would have no food. v11 Then their father Israel said to them, "If it must be so, then obey me. Take in your bags some of this country's best products. Carry a present to the man. Take balm, honey, spice, myrrh, nuts, and almonds. v12 Take double money with you. Carry back with you the money that came back in the tops of your sacks. Perhaps it was a mistake. v13 Take also your brother. And set out and go again to the man. v14 I pray to the God who can do anything. I pray that God will protect you when you are in front of the man. I pray that the man will send back your other brother and Benjamin. If I lose my children, I lose everything." v15 So the brothers took the present and they took the double money with them. They took Benjamin and they set out. They went to Egypt and they stood in front of Joseph. Verse 11. Balm is a medicine. People use spice to give more flavor to food. People use myrrh to produce a pleasant smell. Almonds are a kind of nuts. Verse 12. The double money included the money that they found in their sacks earlier. And it included money to buy more grain. The meal in Joseph's house. v16 Joseph saw that Benjamin was with them. So he said to the manager of his house, "Bring these men into my house. Kill an animal and prepare a meal. These men shall eat with me at noon." v17 The manager did what Joseph told him to do. And he brought the brothers to Joseph's house. v18 The brothers were afraid because men brought them to Joseph's house. They said, "They have brought us here because of the money that they returned to our sacks before. That is the reason why they brought us here. He wants to show that we are guilty. They will attack us. He will make us slaves and he will take our donkeys." Verse 16. To eat together was a sign of friendship. So the manager knew that Joseph was friendly towards the brothers. But the brothers did not know that yet. Verse 18. The brothers did not know why they were going to Joseph's house. They could not guess that they would eat a meal with Joseph. They made the only guess that they could make. And they were very much afraid. V19. So they went to the manager of Joseph's house and they spoke with him. They spoke at the door of the house. V20. They said, "Oh, sir. We came here the first time in order to buy food." V21. Then we reached the place where we stopped for the night. There we opened our sacks. And we discovered every man's money. The money was in the tops of the sacks. All our money was there. So we have brought it again with us. V22. And we have brought other money so that we may buy food. We do not know who put our money in our sacks. V23. The manager of Joseph's house replied, "Do not worry. Do not be afraid. Your God and your father's God put money in your sacks for you. I received your money." Then he brought Simeon out to them. Verse 19. They spoke at the door because they did not want to go into the house. They thought that it was like a trap. They did not know what Joseph would do to them. Verse 23. The manager of Joseph's house already knew about the money. Perhaps he had put the money back into the sacks during the brothers' previous visit. See Genesis 42:25. So he knew that Joseph refused to take money from the brothers. And he knew that Joseph would not hurt the brothers. Otherwise, he would not eat a meal with them. But he did not know that they were Joseph's brothers. But this verse also tells us something else. It tells us that the manager knew about Joseph's God. The manager knew that Joseph served God. He knew that Joseph had learned about God from his father. And he knew that Joseph's God cared about people. Otherwise, nobody would believe that God might give money to people. So it is certain that Joseph had told the manager about God. Joseph is a model for us. We might ask ourselves, do the people that we work with know about God? Do they know that God cares about people? Have we told them about God? V24. The manager of Joseph's house led the brothers into the house. He gave water to them and they washed their feet. And he gave food to their donkeys. V25. The brothers heard that Joseph would return at noon. And they heard that they would eat a meal in Joseph's house. So they prepared the present that they had brought. V26. And when Joseph came home, the brothers brought the present to him. They bent themselves down to the ground in front of him. Verse 25. To eat together was a sign of friendship. And the brothers heard that they would eat a meal at Joseph's house. Perhaps they would eat a meal with Joseph. That would mean that they were not in danger. But they were still worried. They did not understand what was happening. And they still could not be sure that they were safe. V27. Joseph asked whether they were well. And he said, "Is your father well, the old man, whom you mentioned? Is he still alive?" V28. They said, "Your servant our father is well. He is still alive." And they bent their heads down in honor of Joseph. V29. And Joseph saw Benjamin, who was his brother. Benjamin was his mother's son. Joseph said, "Is this your youngest brother, whom you mentioned to me? Let God be kind to you, my son." V30. Then Joseph went quickly out of the room, because of his emotion when he saw his brother. He looked for a place where he might weep. And he entered his own room and he wept there. V31. Then he washed his face and he came out. He controlled himself. And he said, "Bring the food." Verse 29. Benjamin was his brother. All the brothers were sons of Joseph's father. But only Benjamin was a son of Joseph's mother. Joseph called Benjamin "my son." But that was a common greeting by an important person to someone who was young. Joseph was not saying that Benjamin was a relative. V32. The servants brought food to Joseph apart from the other men. The brothers also were apart. And the Egyptians who ate with Joseph were apart. The Egyptians did not eat with the Hebrews, because Egyptians never eat with foreigners. V33. The brothers were sitting as Joseph directed. The oldest brother sat at the head of the table. That was his right because he was the oldest son. And the youngest brother sat at the other end. And the brothers looked at each other in great surprise. V34 A servant took shares to them from Joseph's table. But Benjamin's share was 5 times bigger than the share of the other brothers. So they ate and drank with Joseph. Verse 32. It was the custom that Egyptians, inhabitants of Egypt, did not eat with foreigners. Also, Pharaoh may have made Joseph an Egyptian priest. And it was the custom that Egyptian priests did not eat with other Egyptians. But Joseph had another reason to eat separately. He was not ready to show that he was friendly with his brothers. Verse 33. On important occasions, the brothers would sit in order. The oldest brother would sit nearest to the head of the table. The other brothers would sit in the order of their ages. And Joseph put each brother in the right position. The brothers were very surprised. They could not understand how Joseph knew the correct order. Verse 34. These shares were not the main part of the meal. Joseph ate at a separate table from them. He sent small shares from his own table to his brothers. That showed that they were eating the meal together. It showed that they were his guests. So these shares were small. And Benjamin's larger share was not more than he could eat. Chapter 44. Joseph's plot against his brothers. V1 Then Joseph commanded the manager of his house. He said to him, "Fill the men's bags with grain. Give to them as much grain as they can carry. And put each man's money in the top of his sack. V2 And put my cup, the silver cup, in the top of the youngest one's sack. Put it there with the money that he paid for the grain." And Joseph's manager did as Joseph commanded him. V3 As soon as the morning came, Joseph sent the brothers away with their donkeys. V4 When the brothers had gone only a short distance from the city, Joseph spoke to his manager. He said, "Go. Follow the men. When you catch up with them, speak to them. Say, 'You have done an evil thing to us after we did good things for you. You have stolen the silver cup. V5 My master drinks from this cup. He also uses it to find the truth by magic. You have done a very wrong thing." Verse 5. To find the truth by magic. Egyptians used to pour oil into water that was in a cup. Then they looked at the pattern of the oil. They thought that the pattern showed what was true. The Hebrews did not do this. Joseph probably did not do it. But he pretended to his brothers that he did it. The cup that an Egyptian used for this purpose was a very special cup. So if the brothers had stolen such a special cup, that was a very evil deed. V6 When the manager caught up with the brothers, he spoke these words to them. V7 They said to him, "My master should not say such words as these. We, who are your servants, would never do such a thing." V8 We found the money that was in the tops of our sacks. And we brought it back to you from our own country, Canaan. We have no reason to steal silver or gold from your master's house. V9 If you find the cup among one person's possessions, let him die. And we also will be my master's slaves. V10 The manager said, "We will do what you say. He who has the cup shall be my slave. The other men shall be without blame." V11 Then every man quickly put his sack down on the ground and every man opened his sack. V12 And the manager searched. He began with the oldest brother and he finished with the youngest brother. And he found the cup in Benjamin's sack. V13 Then they tore their clothes. Every man loaded his donkey and they returned to the city. Verses 9 to 10. The brothers were certain that they had not taken the cup. They proposed that anyone who had the cup should die. They proposed that all the other brothers should become slaves. If the manager agreed to that, it would be definite. The punishment that they proposed would happen. That was the custom by Egyptian law. But the manager did not agree to such a severe punishment. He pretended that the brothers had proposed a smaller punishment. Verse 12. The manager also found the money that was in the top of each sack. But the cup was very much more important than the money. So the manager did not mention the money. Judah appeals to Joseph. v14 When Judah and his brothers reached Joseph's house, Joseph was still there. They fell to the ground in front of him. v15 Joseph said to them, "You have done an evil deed. You should have known that a man like me can certainly find the truth by magic." v16 And Judah said, "We do not know what to say to my master. We do not know how to speak. We cannot show that we are honest. God has shown that we are guilty. We are my master's slaves. Both we and the one who had the cup are my master's slaves." v17 But Joseph said, "I would certainly not do that. Only the man who had the cup shall be my slave. But you other men, go in peace to your father." Verse 15. Probably Joseph did not believe that he could find the truth by magic. See the comment on verse 5. Pharaoh believed in magic. See Genesis 41:8. Many wise men in Egypt believed in magic. So Joseph told his brothers that he could find the truth by magic. That is what a ruler of Egypt would say. And Joseph said it in order to make his brothers more anxious. Verse 16. Judah knew that he had not taken the cup. He was sure that his brothers had not taken it. They were too worried to do that. They wanted to take the grain that they had bought. And they wanted to return to their father in Canaan. They would not want the cup. And Judah knew that Benjamin had not taken the cup. He would never do that. So Judah said, "God has shown that we are guilty." He thought that God had put the cup in Benjamin's sack. He thought that God was punishing them. It was a punishment for what they had done to Joseph 22 years before. Verse 17. Joseph was testing his brothers. Many years before this time, they had plotted to kill Joseph. See Genesis 37:18. And they had plotted to sell him as a slave. They plotted to sell him to Ishmaelites, who were going to Egypt. See Genesis 37:27. Joseph wanted to know whether the brothers would do the same thing again. Would they let Benjamin become a slave? Would they leave Benjamin in Egypt? Or were they more honorable than they were 22 years before? v18 Then Judah went closer to Joseph. And he said, "Sir, please let your servant say a word to my master. And let not your anger be fierce against your servant. Truly you are like Pharaoh himself." v19 My master asked his servants, "Have you a father or a brother?" v20 And we said to my master, "We have a father, who is an old man. And we have a young brother. He was born while his father was already old. He had another brother by the same mother, but he is dead. He is the only child of his mother who remains. His father loves him." v21 Then you said to your servants, "Bring your brother to me, so that I may see him." v22 We said to my master, "The boy cannot leave his father. If he should leave his father would die." v23 Then you said to your servants, "Unless your youngest brother is with you, you shall not see my face again." v24 Then we went back to your servant my father. And we told him what my master had said. Verse 18. Reuben was the oldest brother, but Judah had become the leader. See verse 14. See also Genesis 43:3-8. And after this time, when Jacob gave his blessing to his sons, he made Judah the most important. See Genesis 49:8 and the comment. Judah's character was very different from what it had been 22 years before. Judah had suggested that the brothers should sell Joseph. See Genesis 37:26-27. But in these verses, he showed that he cared deeply about Benjamin. And he cared deeply about his father Jacob. Verse 22. Judah called Benjamin the boy. But Benjamin was more than 22 years of age. See the comment on Genesis 43:8. Probably Joseph remembered that the brothers used to call him Joseph, the boy. See Genesis 37:30. v25 Judah continued, "Then our father said, 'Go again and buy some food for us.' v26 We said, 'We cannot go there. If our youngest brother goes with us, we will go there. But we cannot see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us. V27 Then your servant my father spoke to us. He said, you know that my wife produced 2 sons for me. V28 One son left me. And I said, certainly wild animals have torn him apart. I have never seen him since that time. V29 If you take the son also from me, then perhaps some evil thing will happen to him. You would send me and my gray hairs sadly to my grave. V30 And Judah continued, I shall come to your servant my father, and the boy will not be with us. His father's life depends on the boy's life. V31 Therefore, when he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die. Your servants will send our father and his gray hairs sadly to his grave. V32 And I, your servant, became responsible for the boy. I said, if I do not bring him back, then the blame shall be on me for all ages. V33 Now therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the boy. I will be a slave to my Lord. But let the boy go back with his brothers. V34 I cannot go back to my father if the boy is not with me. I am afraid of the evil thing that would happen to my father. Verse 28. The brothers had already mentioned Joseph. They had said, one brother is dead. See Genesis 42:13, 32. But in this verse, Judah said more than that. However, Judah did not confess that the brothers were responsible. They were unwilling to say that they were guilty. And Judah did not think that it would be helpful to confess. Verses 32 to 33. Judah had promised to Jacob, I shall bring him back. See Genesis 43:9. But he was not able to bring Benjamin back. So he tried to send Benjamin back. If he could do that, he would have kept his promise to his father. Judah alone offered to stay in Egypt as a slave. But, apart from that, he spoke on behalf of all the brothers. He showed that they all cared deeply about Benjamin. Verse 34. The evil thing that would happen to my father. Judah thought that his father would die. His father had said that. See Genesis 42:38. And Judah had just told Joseph what his father had said. See verse 29. Chapter 45. Joseph tells his brothers who he is. V1 Then Joseph could not control himself in front of all those who stood by him. He cried, make everyone go out from me. So nobody stayed with Joseph when he showed himself to his brothers. V2 Joseph wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him. And the people who were in Pharaoh's court heard. Verse 1. Joseph had tested his brothers. He had acted as a judge. And he had proved that the character of the brothers had changed. But he could not say, you deserve that, I forgive you. His emotion was too strong. He could not still act as a judge. He could only act as a brother. Verse 2. And the people who were in Pharaoh's court heard. Perhaps they heard the sound when Joseph wept. Or perhaps they heard about it when people told them afterwards. V3 And Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? But his brothers could not answer him, because Joseph astonished them. V4 So Joseph said to his brothers, come near to me. And they came near to him. And he said, I am your brother, Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. V5 And now, do not be worried. Do not be angry with yourselves because you sold me here. God sent me here before you. He did that so as to keep us alive. V6 The famine has lasted for 2 years. And for another 5 years, people will not plow and they will not harvest crops. V7 And God sent me before you so that your families should remain on the earth. He sent me so that many people would remain alive. V8 So you did not send me here, but God sent me. And he has made me like a father to Pharaoh. God has made me the master over Pharaoh's house. He has made me the ruler over all Egypt. Verse 3. Before this, Joseph had spoken with his brothers by an interpreter. Joseph spoke in the Egyptian language and the brothers spoke in the Hebrew language. The brothers thought that Joseph did not understand the Hebrew language. But at this time, Joseph sent all the Egyptians out. So there was no interpreter. And Joseph spoke in the Hebrew language. Joseph knew that his father was still alive. The brothers had told him that. But he said this so as to show that he cared about his father. Verse 4. I am your brother, Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. This verse speaks briefly. It means, I am your brother, Joseph, to whom you did a wrong thing. So people sold me in Egypt. The brothers did not sell Joseph in Egypt. But because of their deed, other people sold Joseph in Egypt. For a similar verse that may speak briefly, see Genesis 37:36 and comment. Verse 5. Joseph said, do not be angry with yourselves. God sent me here. He did not say, you did a wrong thing, but I forgive you. He could not say that. The thing that happened was right. God did it. God brought Joseph to Egypt. God did that so as to save Jacob's family in the famine. And he did it so as to save Egypt. God also had another purpose, which Joseph did not know. God had brought his people to Egypt to make them into a nation. In Egypt, they would learn many things that they would need to know in later times. Verse 8. Like a father to Pharaoh, perhaps this means that he had looked after Pharaoh's business. Or perhaps this was an official name that described Joseph's authority. V9. Joseph continued, hurry. Go to my father. Say to him, your son Joseph says, God has made me the master of all Egypt. Come to me here and do not delay. V10. You shall live in the district that is called Goshen. So you shall be near to me. You and your children and your grandchildren shall live there. Bring your sheep and your cows. Bring all that you have. V11. There will still be a famine for a further 5 years, but I will provide for you. Otherwise, you will starve. Your family will starve. And all that you have will starve. V12. And now it is I who speak to you. You can see that it is I. My brother Benjamin can see that it is I. V13. You must tell my father how important I am in Egypt. Tell him about all that you have seen. Hurry and bring my father here. V14. Then Joseph put his arms round his brother Benjamin's neck and he wept. And Benjamin put his arms round Joseph. V15. Joseph kissed all his brothers and he wept with them. And after that, his brothers talked with him. Verse 9. Joseph gave honor to God. He told the brothers what God had done. Verse 10. Joseph had made this plan long before this time. And he had chosen the district that was called Goshen. That was the place where his family should live. Verse 15. They had many things to say. They had not met as brothers for 22 years. During that time, they had all changed in character. Probably they talked about what the brothers had done to Joseph. See Genesis 37:24. That was easier to do because of what Joseph said. He said, do not be angry with yourselves. God sent me here before you. See verse 5. The brothers go to fetch their father. V16. Pharaoh and his servants heard that Joseph's brothers had come. They were very pleased. V17. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, say to your brothers, do this. Load your animals and go back to your country, Canaan. V18. Bring your father and all your people to me. I will give you the best things in Egypt. And you shall eat the best food in the country. V19. Command your brothers also, do this. Take wagons from Egypt so that your children and your wives may ride. And come and bring your father. V20. Do not worry about your goods. The best things in all Egypt are yours. V21. Israel's sons did so. And Joseph gave to them wagons, as Pharaoh commanded. And he gave to them food for the journey. V22. He gave new clothes to each of them. But to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver. And he gave to him 5 sets of clothes. V23. Moreover he sent to his father 10 donkeys, which carried products of Egypt. And he sent 10 female donkeys, which carried grain, bread, and other food. These things were for his father on the journey. v24 Then Joseph sent his brothers away. And as they left, he spoke to them. He said, "Do not quarrel during the journey." Verse 17. Joseph had already said this to his brothers. But it was necessary that Pharaoh should approve. And Pharaoh approved gladly. Verse 20. Actually, they did bring their goods to Egypt. They brought their animals and all their possessions. See Genesis 46:6. Verse 24. Joseph spoke as a brother would speak. He did not speak as a foreign ruler would speak. He had a friendly relationship with his brothers and he did not blame them. v25 So the brothers left Egypt and they came to their father Jacob in their own country, Canaan. v26 And they told their father, "Joseph is still alive. And he is the ruler of all Egypt." Their words astonished Jacob and he did not believe them. v27 But they told him all that Joseph had said to them. And Jacob saw the wagons that Joseph had sent. He recovered from the shock. v28 And Israel said, "Now I believe what you say. Joseph my son is still alive. I will go. I will see him before I die." Verse 28. Perhaps the brothers confessed to their father Jacob at this time what they had done 20 years before. They had dropped Joseph into a deep hole and they had put a goat's blood on his coat. See Genesis 37:24, 31. Chapter 46. Jacob travels to Egypt. v1 So Israel set out on his journey and he took all his possessions with him. He came to Beersheba. And there he gave offerings to the God of his father Isaac. v2 And God spoke to Israel in dreams. He said, "Jacob, Jacob." And Israel said, "I am here." v3 Then God said, "I am God. I am your father's God. Do not be afraid to go to Egypt. There I will make from you a great nation. v4 I will go with you to Egypt and I will also bring you back again. And when you die Joseph's hand shall close your eyes." Verses 1-2. Israel and Jacob are two names of the same man. See Genesis 32:28. God had sent Joseph to Egypt. God had prepared a place in Egypt where Jacob and his family could live. God was providing food for Jacob and for his family during the famine. By these things, God was guiding Jacob. God was showing him that he should go to Egypt. But Jacob still needed to make sure that God wanted him to go to Egypt. So he went to Beersheba, which was on the way to Egypt. Perhaps he used the altar that Isaac had built for his offering. See Genesis 26:23, 25. Jacob prayed. And then he was certain what God wanted him to do. When God guides us, he may prepare the way for us. He may make some things impossible for us. And he may give us opportunities. These things may tell us what we should do. But we still need to pray. Then we can be certain what God wants us to do. Verse 3. Until this time, Jacob expected to go to Egypt for a short time. He expected that he would return as soon as the famine was over. But at this time God told him that his descendants would stay there for a long time. They would stay until they became a great nation. Verse 4. I will bring you back again. The word "you" does not mean Jacob himself. It means the nation that Jacob would become. So it means Jacob's descendants. Jacob himself would not return. But when he was dead, his body would return. And his sons would bury him in Canaan. In the phrase "when you die," the word "you" does mean Jacob himself. Joseph's hand shall close your eyes. That means that Jacob would die in peace. And Joseph would be with him. So Joseph would close Jacob's eyes when he died. That was a son's duty. v5 Then Jacob set out from Beersheba. And Israel's sons carried Jacob their father. And they carried their children and their wives. They carried them in the wagons that Pharaoh had sent for them. v6 They also took their cows and their possessions, which they had gained in Canaan. And they came into Egypt. Jacob and all his family came with him into Egypt. v7 He brought his sons and his sons' sons. He brought his daughters and his sons' daughters. He brought all his family with him into Egypt. Verses 5 to 7. From Hebron to Beersheba was 50 kilometers 30 miles. And from Beersheba to Goshen was 300 kilometers 180 miles. When the brothers traveled to Egypt before, they took food for themselves and for their donkeys. And the journey might take 10 days. But when the whole family traveled with all their animals, they had to go more slowly. The animals needed to eat grass, but there was little grass because of the famine. So the journey took much longer. The names of those who entered Egypt. v8 These are the names of Israel's family who entered Egypt. They were Jacob and his sons. Jacob's oldest son was Reuben. v9 Reuben's sons were Hanok, Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. v10 Simeon's sons were Jemuel, Jamin, Ahad, Jachin, Zohar, and Shaul. Shaul's mother was a Canaanite woman. v11 Levi's sons were Gershon, Kohat, and Merari. v12 Judah's sons were Er, Onan, Shelah, Perez, and Zerah. But Er and Onan died in Canaan. And Perez's sons were Hezron and Hamel. v13 Issachar's sons were Tola, Phavah, Ayub, and Shimron. v14 Zebulun's sons were Seard, Elon and Yaliel. v15 These are Leah's sons. They were born to Jacob in Paddan Aram. His daughter Dinah was also born there. The number of these sons and daughters of Jacob was 33. v16 Gad's sons were Ziphion, Haggai, Shani, Esban, Eri, Arodi, and Areli. v17 Asher's sons were Imnah, Ishva, Ishvi, Beriah, with Sarah their sister. And Beriah's sons were Heber and Malchiel. v18 These are Zilpah's sons. Laban gave Zilpah to Leah his daughter. These 16 children were born to Jacob. v19 Rachel's sons. Rachel was Jacob's wife were Joseph and Benjamin. v20 Joseph became the father of Manasseh and Ephraim. They were born in Egypt and their mother was Asenath. She was Potiphar's daughter. Potiphar was the priest of On. v21 Benjamin's sons were Bela, Becher, Ashbel, Gera, Naaman, Ai, Rosh, Muppim, Huppim, and Ard. v22 These are Rachel's sons. These 14 children were born to Jacob. v23 Dan's son was Hushim. v24 Naphtali's sons were Yaziel, Guni, Jezer, and Shillem. v25 These are Bilhah's sons. Laban gave Bilhah to Rachel his daughter. These 7 children were born to Jacob. v26 The number of people who came into Egypt was 66. Those were Jacob's own relatives. That number does not include Jacob's sons' wives. v27 And Joseph's sons, who were born to him in Egypt, were 2. The number of all the persons of Jacob's family who entered Egypt was 70. Verse 8. These are refers to the names in the verses that follow. In these verses, the word sons sometimes means grandsons. And it can also include the sons of grandsons. Verse 15. We do not know why the total is 33. Verses 9 to 15 mention 33 names. With Dinah too, the total is 34. Perhaps these verses leave out Er and Onan because they did not go to Egypt. And perhaps there was another daughter. That could make a total that is 33. Verses 15, 18, 22, 25. These are refers to the names in the previous verses. Joseph meets his father. v28 Jacob sent Judah before him to Joseph. He asked Joseph to meet him in the district that is called Goshen. And they came into Goshen. v29 Then Joseph prepared his chariot and he went to meet Israel his father in Goshen. He presented himself to his father and he put his arms round his father's neck. He wept for a time. v30 Israel said to Joseph, Now I am ready to die. I have seen your face. and I know that you are still alive. v. 31 Joseph spoke to his brothers and to his father's family. He said, I will go and I will speak to Pharaoh. I will say to him, my brothers and my father's family, who were in Canaan, have come to me. v. 32 The men are keepers of animals. They have their own sheep and cows. They have brought their sheep and cows and they have brought all their possessions. v. 33 When Pharaoh calls you, he will say, what is your occupation? v. 34 And you shall say, your servants have kept animals for our whole lives. Our fathers did the same thing before us. In that way you may live in the district that is called Goshen. The inhabitants of Egypt avoid those who keep animals. Verse 30. Jacob said, now I am ready to die. Actually, Jacob lived for 17 years after this time. Verse 34. Joseph was afraid that his brothers would become slaves. So he told them to emphasize that they kept animals. The inhabitants of Egypt themselves kept few animals. They avoided people who kept animals. So they would not want the brothers as slaves in their houses.